I recently wrote, as a little bit of a programming exercise more than anything else, some machine learning neural networks to try and predict the foreign exchange market. And my inspiration for doing such was that I was reading an article about different candlestick patterns to look for, and many of them gave me the impression that neural networks could easily calculate them. So, for example, there's the three white soldiers where you have three candlesticks that have very little wicks going up, and then the three black crows is the reverse of that. There's the hammer where you have a very long candlestick with a very small body. And those are things that neural networks are very good at looking at, right? And if you look at the last 10 days of trading activity, which most of the patterns involved, 10 days is only 40 data points, right? You have open, high, low, close. It's the traditional way of looking at it. And if you're using 10 days to predict the 11th day, what you have is a mathematical function of 40 inputs and one output, right? 40 real numbers go in, one real number comes out. And you're trying to approximate that function. And you have lots of historical data, right? Currencies have been free floating for since 1971. Actually, even before then, right? If you include precious metals as as currencies, right? The ratios of precious metals that's been going on. We probably have good data for that for at least thousands of years, right? Probably not daily data for thousands of years, but at least of the general trend, right? So it gave me an inspiration that I could use neural networks to consume the last 50 years of data and see what I could do with trading, right? And so, for example, basically, you're learning parameters for a function of, this is a function that has about a few hundred coefficients, and you're using historical data to learn those coefficients, right? And some of the activation functions involved are, this is a famous activation function. RaLu takes an input x and returns the maximum between 0 and x. It looks simple enough, but when you compose those with other RaLus and other linear regression functions, in theory, it can represent any function, right? As long as you have the right coefficients. I'll let you read into about that. Basically, any continuous function can be represented by a network of RaLus. What you need to learn are the coefficients. And the first currency pair I tried to train this data on was the US dollar to the Japanese yen. I talked about in a previous video why I'm really bullish about the Japanese yen. It is very over-leveraged, and as the markets deleverage, there's going to be huge demand for Japanese yen to repay the margin debts, right? And I did some astrology predictions, and the stars in the heaven basically say that we're kind of in a super cycle where two of those cycles are converging at the same time, and the Japanese yen is going to soar to about 30 to the dollar if we believe astrology. So I kind of used neural networks to try and confirm that. And what I did was I modeled I pretended we had the neural network all along, and I did a simulation of trading starting in 1995 to see what would happen. It looks great, right? You do make 100-some times your money, but it's in 20-some years. It's not a terribly high return, actually. You can get much better returns without taking all this risk. But the problem is the amount of risk you're taking, right? Anytime you had a black swan event, this is 9/11 and the dot-com bubble right here. Right here we had the financial crisis, and right here we had the beginning of COVID. And you never know if you're at the beginning of any of those, right? So this is a huge amount of risk just to make a normal return that you can make historically just by buying and holding stocks, right? And think about all the work you have to do, and going forward, there's no guarantee that any of this is going to work, right? But the main killer of doing this US dollar Japanese yen prediction was that black swans killed everything, right? And so it inspired me to think about what currency pair I could trade that would kind of neutralize black swan events, right? Here we had anytime something big happened in the U.S. or Japan. I think the Japanese earthquake is one of these. 9/11, financial crisis, earthquake, COVID, right? If we didn't have those four drops, we could have had a huge return, right? Unfortunately, I don't have a good way of predicting any of those events, right? I don't know if neural networks can do anything like that. I would think it's possible if you had enough data, right? If you had all sorts of data on social events around the world, maybe news articles going around the world, social media feeds, if you could hack into everybody's email and certainly if you could hack into the terrorist communications, you could predict 9/11, right? But that's beyond the scope of my work. But I encourage you to think about a currency pair that would neutralize some of these things. I'll give you a hint. If you had two currencies that would respond equally to a lot of events around the world, right? They have to be in the same region, right? Um, but yet they'd have to be separate enough for there to be enough movement for they can't be pegged to one another, right? But they would have to be kind of pseudo pegged so that social events around the world couldn't do damage to any sort of predictions, right? So obviously, U.S. dollar to anything is going to be out, right? Okay, I'll let you think about it for a second. So let me tell you the nickname I give to that currency pair, because all of these U.S. dollar ones have funny nicknames. U.S. dollar to Japanese yen is sometimes called the ninja pair, right? The U.S. dollar to the British pound is sometimes called cable because it used to be traded via an underground cable, right? The U.S. dollar to the euro is sometimes called the fiber because fiber optic networks, right? This particular currency pair I call the Mary Curry because Mary Curry made a very large trade when she immigrated from Poland to France. Obviously, the euro didn't exist at the time. The euro to the Polish Zoit. And unfortunately, we only have 20 years of data because the euro began its life in 1999. The Polish Zoit, technically it began at the end of World War I, but it had two hyperinflations and then they redenominated it by taking every 10,000 to become one new one. So I also started that in 1999. It was very unstable between 89 and 99. Okay, so after learning the neural network, take a look at this. We still have black swans, but instead of losing money, you were at least going sideways. And that's all right in my opinion because you only need one of these in your lifetime, right? One or two of these, and as long as the other times you're not losing money. So you can think of this as like playing a lottery where once in a while you win a jackpot, and most of the time it costs you nothing to play, right? So here we have 9/11 is somewhere here. I believe this is the financial crisis right here. COVID-19. You did lose a little bit during COVID-19, right? But in the grand scheme of things, and the overall return was almost 10,000 to 1, right? This is a lot better than the astrology or the U.S. dollar to Japanese yen. The other thing I had to do was to figure out how much leverage to use. When you trade foreign currencies, you use leverage. You would think that if you had a good strategy, the more leverage, the better. It actually doesn't work that way. The reason being that you're going to have days where the currencies move 10% in either direction. If you're leveraged 10 to 1, there goes your entire bankroll, right? And it turned out 4 to 1 seemed to give the best return. And there are plenty of ETFs that will handle 4 to 1, right? I think that's the highest I found in ETF. So apparently, it's been common knowledge that 4 to 1 seems to do the best, right? But the days are numbered because eventually Poland's going to join the euro, or the euro is going to dissolve, and this might be your opportunity of a lifetime, right? If all the countries go back to their currencies, or if Poland joins, or if we go back to a gold standard, the game is over, right? Thanks for watching.